Well, good morning, everybody. I want to start you off today looking here first at an article released by NOAA yesterday. As you can see by the title here, there's been a significant increase in their computing infrastructure, and I'm really excited about this because of what it's going to be doing to the forecast suite of models that they have, and improving the technology that goes into them, and also the computing capacity. We often talk about the differences between the U.S. models and the European model, and we often find that the European model is a superior model when it comes to skill. In fact, I show you this graphic all the time from Ryan Maui, looking in blue at the forecast skill of the European model versus red, which is the GFS, which is the flagship model for the United States. And you can see even lately which model has been performing better here. So one of the separating factors between what the Europeans have done and what the US has done, besides computing infrastructure and funding, is that they have certain techniques which were developed by numerous people all over the world that are being employed by the European system, but not in the US models just yet, at least in the same way. And this article says that they're going to start to do that. What I'm talking about here is data assimilation. It's not only that, but it's an increase in resolution, and it's also an increase in the number of ensemble members. So this is pretty exciting news. I can't wait to see what this does, and we all are the benefactors of this. So it's just a great bit of information here. NOAA also released this. They changed their long-range hurricane forecast yesterday on the 10th. And if I could slide down here and show you their newest update, this is what it looks like. Now, I get to be critical just because, but I'm a little bit, this 7-name range here for the number of named storms, they've got a 60% chance of being above normal, but this is a pretty large range. And this just reflects, so I guess I shouldn't say I'm being critical, but I agree that there is still a lot of uncertainty with this upcoming hurricane season. And the reason why I think a lot of us are struggling with this is that the ocean temperatures are so hot. They're ready, okay? But we are curious as to the pace at which El Nino is arriving, what it might do to the wind shear in the Gulf of Mexico and across the Caribbean. And if the Bermuda High stays farther out into the central Atlantic, well, we could have a lot of named storms, but they don't necessarily hit the U.S. coast. That's one possibility. The other side of this is we could really get rocked this year because of how prime those ocean temperatures are right now. So just a couple of important things that they've released I wanted to bring to your attention. Now, right now, we are watching something important happening. So I want to cover the long range first today. And that is, we've seen the MJO begin to show itself up somewhere over here in the Western Pacific. Now, this is not a full-blown MJO signal, like a big convectively coupled wave. It's not jumping way out here in either of these phases to come out higher amplitude into phase 7 and 8, but it's here. And what that means for us is that we're starting to see a better sense of some rising motion happening in the Pacific Ocean. Now, the significance of this is actually over here. And what you're looking at over here is kind of the results of moving the MJO around a bit. It's actually going to give us, there's Africa, I know it's off the page here, but it's giving us better rising motion over Africa. In other words, the MJO is kind of working in tandem with the African kind of monsoonal flow that comes off of the Sahel and basically kicks off better tropical systems. So while the next 7 days, in fact, let's see if they did an update here. No, it's still the 2 a.m. update. They're not looking right now at tropical systems developing in the next 7 days. Some of the forecast models really are. So the European ensemble, all of these tracks, this doesn't mean a system is formed, but this is where the model is attempting to produce tropical low pressure. And that red blob you see there, that would be the position, of the Bermuda High. Now, many of us know we would have loved to have seen the Bermuda High here back in May and June. That would have helped pump the moisture into the Midwest and prevent the drought. But it is back now. And so our questions are, does it remain somewhere in this vicinity? Because if it does, that gives us a higher probability of steering a system toward the United States. If it shrinks back toward the east or toward the northeast, these systems will tend to curl up into the North Pacific and could bring more of the east coast, the North Atlantic, and bring more of the east coast into play here. But the latest update that just came out from the European model over the next 10 days, this is a probability map of getting the development of tropical depression. You can now see that the models have become much more aggressive in this area at developing something. So we will have something to be watching in terms of the trends over the weekend with respect to tropical activity here. One other thing to note, we talked yesterday about the relationship between Dora and the just absolutely devastating fires in Hawaii. I'll be honest, I don't know that I've ever seen something quite like that. About the only near-term recollection I have would have been 2 winters ago in, I think it was between Christmas and New Year's, we had the the fires that came off of the Rocky Mountains and went across Denver and some of the surrounding suburbs that moved so fast. It's heartbreaking to continue to watch some of the imagery that's coming out there. But Dora will pass later on today as a major hurricane across the international date line, being reclassified as a typhoon, where it is expected to meander a bit farther to the north and west. Okay, from here, I want to bring you up to speed on some of the new data that NOAA released yesterday as well on their outlook for El Nino. So they do have for the next several months, if you look down here all the way through November, December, January, a 99 to 100% chance of having El Nino conditions. And they've actually kept this out there quite some ways, all the way to March, April, and May. Now, something important to note about this is that when you look historically at El Nino episodes versus La Nina episodes tend to last longer. Usually we call them like double dippers. They can last 2 to 3 seasons versus El Ninos, which typically peak in late summer and fall, reach their highest around December, and then start to crash after that. So every large El Nino event that we've had historically has always come crashing down the following year. So to see the newest forecast suggest that even out to next March, April, May, we still have a high probability of having El Nino. We'll just need to monitor this because those ocean temperatures are quite warm. And if there isn't something to kind of influence them, I'm talking about tradesman behavior, we could be watching an El Nino that persists all the way to next spring. And I'll tell you something, the second go-around for a spring in El Nino does not look like the first go-around. We have much better dynamical forcing in place, which will ultimately impact a lot of the things that bring precipitation across the U.S. We will look at that and talk a lot about it. But right now, I want to bring you up to speed on this. I've been showing you this a couple times a week. This is the newest update on the Southern Oscillation Index. Now, this is just one metric by which we try to assess what's going on with the tropics, particularly the trade winds in where we have El Nino. Now, if you remember, I said we need to get down here below -7, which is right in through here. Okay, so -7 is about right there. We've watched since late July the value of the Southern Oscillation Index really plummet here. Now, this has been helped along by typhoon activity in the West Pacific. It's been helped along by something called the Southern Annular Mode and the MJO movement. But the reality of it is this now down here around -10, or no, excuse me, lower than that. It's around -13. And what's important to understand is that this means that the consistent drop in the Southern Oscillation Index likely means that our El Nino is going to be taking a much larger role going into the remainder of summer and into fall with respect to our weather patterns. So let's get a quick review on some of these longer range model updates. We're going to start first with the newest update from the European model released yesterday on the 10th. This is a August 21st to September 21st outlook. Now, if you notice, we're wetter through parts of the Canadian Prairie, wetter throughout a large portion of the Western Corn Belt and plains and upper Midwest. Models have now kind of shrunk the dryness in the forecast for the southwestern monsoon, but they've increased this area of dryness over here. Now, as any September forecast we've ever given will tell you, you can't rely on this, because what this model is unable to do is to capture the development of any tropical system. And this takes us right, blazing past the peak of hurricane season. So I look at this and I say, I think what's going on is the model overall is seeing a shift around in the behavior of the jet, maybe picking up a bit more flow splitting across the west. So where that comes together makes this whole area very active, but it could signal some ridging in this region, which would be why we see the risk of drier conditions. But I'm not bought into this, and I want you to know it's just barely on this side of drier. So we can't look at this and turn it into like a binary graphic where dry, wet. That's not how this works. Area I'm very concerned about, though, is right in through here. We'll talk more about this in just a few seconds. The Willamette Valley all the way up to like the Seattle area. This has been exceptionally dry, and we're expecting it to stay that way going forward. But I also want to just add to this. So this is the what we call the European weeklies. They come out every day now. And I want to add to that the European seasonal forecast model. So this was the September outlook released last weekend. Was that last weekend? Yeah, I think last weekend from the European model. And it has a similar pattern, but there's always going to be a risk given that there's an El Nino developing that we could be wetter for harvest in this area. It could be wetter in a fall conditions across the northern tier of the United States. And honestly, we should extend this into New England as well. And as I said, September being the peak of the hurricane season, we can't look at this and assume that this is going to be right, that there's going to be dry conditions that are going to stretch from Texas on forward. In fact, there's better evidence that going into September, October, November, December, that Texas is going to turn back over very wet, which is, in my opinion, kind of a cruel punishment after such an incredibly wet spring, right? And then turning over, near record hot and dry. I'll show you the records in a few moments. And then seeing a wet spring, a wet fall going up again. That is the most ill-timed way to deliver precipitation to get a good crop out of Texas and surrounding areas here. But that's what I've got. This is the newest updates for September. I will show you this. This map is, I don't want to give it too much credit here, okay? But when you correlate September and October with the Southern Oscillation Index, wherever you see bluer colors, these represent wetter, and the warmer colors represent drier. Now you notice that most of our colors sit right around here, which means these are weak correlations. But you can kind of see a few areas here that do show up a bit wetter in the forecast, and these same areas that show up drier. I buy into the dryness here, but I don't buy into it there, and I certainly don't buy into the south or in this section in the middle. So when we correlate just one variable, the correlations are not that strong. But one thing we do need to keep an eye on is the drought area across the United States. We've watched it expand in the south. There have been pockets that have expanded here in the central United States, but there's been some improvement in there as well, given some of the recent rains. And, we've been covering the Canadian prairie drought as well, but I'll show you some of the new precipitation updates for Canada in a moment. One area I'm just very concerned about going forward is this part of our Pacific Northwest and the drought that's been endured and built into that region with time. So let's go ahead and have a look at the latest soil moisture data. Now, an area that has missed out on heavy rain, this corner of Iowa, Wisconsin, sections of northern Indiana, Michigan, and getting here into parts of Wisconsin have missed. We know that we're very dry down into Texas, but this is a soil percentile map. So what we're comparing this to is a historical number, right? So this is compared to a range, an average. Where do we sit? So this is not telling you that you've got 2% soil moisture. This is telling you that going down to 16 inches, looking and comparing against historical, where you would sit in the distribution. So it shows you how dry certain areas are compared to normal. So I apologize if I've never explained why I show you this map, but that's what I'm looking at here. We can also just, combine it with the drought monitor and also combine it with some recent precipitation stats, which I'll show you in a few moments. But the reality of it is that we do have a complex of storms early this morning trying to roll through this area. And yesterday, if you just watched this, there were some very large storms that blew up here. And the Storm Prediction Center nailed this. They had this region highlighted as the riskiest area for severe weather yesterday. And that's on the tail end of a frontal boundary that's trying to squeeze through this region. Before I go away from this, look at that cluster of storms in Texas. And also look at some of the big storms back into parts of Nebraska. And I just wanted to draw your attention to the wildfire smoke here in Oregon. So just a couple of things to watch, but take a look at this animation. So this is what we had for the last 12 hours. An isolated storm south, larger cluster of storms moving through that very dry part of Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. So we're not delivering drought-busting rains, but there was rain. I mean, we can see it coming through here early this morning. It's also important to see the remnants. This was helping being fueled by what was left of Eugene, delivering some rain into parts of California here as well. So with this being the setup, the confusing part about today is this. I imagine the Storm Prediction Center, because I have felt this way, has struggled with trying to figure out how this was all going to go down here today with respect to strong to severe storms. And there's a large area that has a slight risk. Now tomorrow, they've moved it over to parts of the Ohio Valley, then getting up into parts of the interior of New England. But again, we're going to be watching the Panhandle region for severe storms. And then this is how things look on the 13th, which would be Sunday. And the Storm Prediction Center, with this next system rolling through, is not only watching this part of the plains getting into the Mid-South, but then going beyond that, right over the Ohio and Tennessee Valley again, right in through here. So this would be valid out there on Monday. So I'm going to show you two different model runs, and I was looking at this just before we started, so let me take you back. I have to say that the initialization of the high-resolution rapid refresh, the 6Z run, must have been pretty good because it got this right. The timing looks good. So as we play through the morning, storms are going to move through this region down into Illinois by 9 a.m., crossing the Illinois River, Interstate 55, and then getting over to east central Illinois before fading by midday. That seems to be a pretty consistent forecast. So this doesn't appear to want to hang on into Indiana. Okay. Now, do we bring rain into the UP and Michigan? Possibly. But this would just be the first kick. The second kick is later. The boundary's still sitting back here. So late on Friday night, we're going to watch for more storms in this area. Now, you also notice that while I'm focusing here, there were storms that moved out of Georgia into South Carolina tonight. And there's also the, what appears to be a monsoonal setup down here in the Four Corners states. But what I'll be anxious to see is how the heavy rain moves through this area, because remember, in the last 2 weeks, this region, some places in here have already gotten 15 inches of rain. Now, the odd thing is this would be an overnight, possibly elevated mesoscale convective system. And what I don't know is what this is going to do in the middle part right in through here. Better chances, I think, of severe weather late tonight coming out of parts of Missouri, going toward Kentucky, Tennessee. That does not rule out the isolated storm events that could be here, farther to the north. But you can see now the complexity of this situation as forecast by the Storm Prediction Center. Again, reminder, this is where they're looking today for the risk. Okay, I can then flip over to the NAM. And again, halfway decent initialization here in the NAM. And it does something quite similar. See how the storms kind of break up going toward the middle of today. And then tonight, they've got that same complex coming into parts of Missouri and southern Illinois that we want to watch out for. That then dives into parts of the Mid-South here by the overnight hours and then clears out east by midday Saturday. All right, after that, there's another low, and you can see it coming down here. And this one's even going to be more tricky because with the frontal boundary diving in like this and the ridge sitting here, there's going to be two pieces to the jet stream flow, one here and one farther to the north. And it could be a series of storms in this area that steal the moisture and possibly some instability from bigger storms happening farther to the north. And so as this plays forward, you can see out to midday Sunday as that front dives in here, we may be kind of sacrificing the ability for these storms to perform because of the storms to the south. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't know. We're going to have to watch this all weekend to see how well this low performs, given that there could be a round of storms ahead of it kind of ruining the environment for the northern storms down here in Missouri. So that's it. That's what I've got for you for the near term. But I look at the 7-day outlook and I get something like this from the WPC. So what's driving this is a ridge now that's here that's going to expand in this direction after troughs roll through. So what do those look like? Let's go right to the European model and get a good sense of this. So take a look. This is early this morning. Okay, getting through the middle of the day, and what does it do? It blows up the storms tonight in the same area. Now remember, this is a lower resolution model that's not convection allowing. That's why it doesn't look the same. But without that, taking those parameters out, we can use it to forecast out farther. So as you see going through the weekend, we're going to watch through this region, and that's where the Storm Prediction Center identified. Then we go into Sunday. This is now Sunday afternoon and evening. There's the next low diving down. And again, it's going to be these storms competing against, for the environment, the storms farther to the north. But that low is going to curl up over Wisconsin. And do you see it now? There's two separate systems. One's being fed here. The other's the low that's coming around from the north. And these two systems are kind of, again, competing for the moisture and instability. But that moves across the Great Lakes states and across the Ohio Valley on Monday and rolls on up to New England. And then behind it, this is probably our last low. Next Thursday, rolling here across Ontario, diving a front down. And then after that point, next Friday, this is when the whole pattern begins to make a shift. So if we look up to the next 10 days, we've got this in terms of probabilities for rainfall. Notice some of the regions we're trying to fill in that were in drought, right? Better storms trying to get south of Highway 16. Wettest conditions in the Mid-South getting up into the Midwest, probably right in through here, and some southwestern monsoon. Drier in a lot of other places. And look how much drier it's gone here in this part of Virginia, North and South Carolina, northern Georgia. But the pattern ends up getting like this. We talked about this all week. We lost the Aleutian Island low. This low you see here is the one that's meandering around the North Pole, and the flow does this. And this ridge opens up, which means we're going to get storms that are going to run the periphery of this ridge, possibly even coming into California. That's going to be your active corridor. The heat's going to expand, and it's going to get drier in there. And that's why our week 2 forecasts look drier, drier, and drier. Where are the storms coming out on the northern side of this? These are late summer ridge riding storms getting set up here. All right, context. This is the last 7 days though. So I want you to see that where we're going to be pushing in the drier weather just recently got a bunch of precipitation. But this actually makes Texas even drier in the forecast, given that the ridge is going to expand, which is no good. And if you look at the last 30 days, the rains coming through now are critical to helping this region. Critical to helping this region. But Texas is going to open back up to more drought going forward in this upcoming forecast. And it's already hot there. Another day of excessive heat watches, warnings, and advisories. We've even had them now up here on kind of in the Willamette Valley as well. And the temperatures going forward are they're going to be hot. This is Friday's high temperatures getting into Saturday, so it just stays on here. We go from Saturday into Sunday. Remember, this is the next system that dives down, delivering some cooler weather. But watch the west heat up here, especially that Willamette Valley, triple-digit heat in and around Portland. We then go here up into Tuesday. This is when the ridge is really big. We have this high over low setup. And then the models want to break that down pretty quickly by next Thursday into Friday. So we're already going to see some relief by next Friday in this area. So the models are showing the next 5 days looking like this. We're going to play this out there day 5 through 10 when the block sets up here. They're in the middle of that time period. And then we're going to watch after that. Now watch the ridge expand out of Texas into the midsection of the country. And why this is important is most of the last almost 45 days or so, we've only seen one episode of heat in this area. So we're going to start to push some late season heat in, expanding it out of Texas, which is just on pace for being one of the hottest summers on record here. Same thing for the Southwest and up the West Coast. So the change is going to come into this area, but not for another week. All right. Appreciate you hanging on this week with me, and I will watch the weather over the weekend, and I'll tell you again about it next week. Have a good one. Thanks.